Continuing You Can Change the World, The Christopher Approach by James Keller. Chapter 16. Individual Initiative in an Organization. You people with good ideas, good motives, and an eternal goal. In short, you Christophers will accomplish wonders in bringing Christ's truth where there is ignorance and indifference, the moment you realize individual power for good, which you can exert in any club or organization to which you may belong. Now, loose would represent all truth, and to bring it, epheros, illuminating it, would be a broader role than Christopher. Then will you more than match the daring pace set by the godless, who are apt at the simple and indispensable art of knowing people, moving among them, understanding their problems, whims, and fancies, sympathizing with them in their sorrows, rejoicing with them in their joys. Yet remember this, people, whether in an organization or not, can tell an instant whether you go among them to help them and guide them, and whether you go only when you want them to help you. The sincerity of your interests, the honesty with which you speak their language, the inoffensiveness with which you air your views, all these are necessary. But by the same token, however, you dare not compromise truth, and it is vital that you do stay on the job. Where you can be a missioner, you should use your efforts to see that your organization fulfills an objective which best serves the interests of the many, not merely the few. It should not be allowed to parallel the example of one group in Pennsylvania, organized for an apostolic purpose, whose members were exceptionally fine people, yet who did little more than meet regularly and complain about conditions in the world, and did nothing to improve them. Fortunately, this sad state of affairs did not continue. During the course of one particular meeting, a Christopher woke the members up to the fact that they were hoping to accomplish by a once-a-month get-together of an hour or so, a program which never got beyond the talking stage, anxious to strengthen the group by encouraging better individual participation in activities which would benefit large numbers of people. He inquired of the assembled men and women, as to their varying occupations. To the surprise of all, it turned out that in almost every case they were holding jobs in which they did little more than earn a living. Following up on this information, Christopher pointed out that in the 140 odd working hours in each month, they might have been in jobs where not only could they earn a living, but could serve as missioners as well. Then he concluded with the suggestion that at least a few of them could easily shift to positions which influence the thoughts and actions of larger sections of the population. That this, Christopher's words, bore fruit is confirmed by the fact that in the months which followed, several of the members went into government work, and one returned to the teaching profession, which she'd abandoned some years before. Another group, which devotes itself to emphasizing the sacredness of marriage, was astonished to find out from one of their members that they were doing only half the job of which they were capable. This member, a newspaperman, was asked by a Christopher to explain the purpose of the organization. On being told this, Christopher commented, "What you're doing is fine, but aren't you keeping too much to yourselves? Why don't you get your friends to bring their ideas on the Christian principles of marriage out into the mainstream of everyday life, to those who never hear of them and who need them far more than you do? And since you're in the newspaper business, why don't you use your organization to encourage more people like yourself to go into the writing field?" The reply was brief, but at the point. "Say, you got something there. Never thought of that before, but I can see now that we've been thinking of ourselves too much. You know what I'm going to do? I'm personally going to push those ideas for all they're worth." They missed the point. A well-known author and foreign affairs expert who recently returned from Europe recounted the trouble one country is having with the Reds. He pointed out that one well-meaning group there makes a practice of reading and discussing the papal encyclicals as the best means of stopping atheistic materialism. But while they keep on talking about the importance of the encyclicals and how necessary they are, strangely enough, they do little or nothing to put the papal recommendations into practical application. In contrast to this, and on a more hopeful note, however, one fine organization run along the similar lines here in the United States is put into everyday practice with less stress on talk and more emphasis on action. These same encyclicals, fired by a couple of tireless Christophers, whose every act bears striking testimony to the power of individual initiative in any group of people. This organization has been the means of affecting for the better the lives of hundreds of thousands of our citizens. Unceasing positive action for good is the best and surest guarantee of a free, God-fearing America of the future. Nothing less will do. For it was Christ himself who said, "Not every one that saith to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doth the will of my Father who is in heaven, he shall enter into the kingdom of heaven." Matthew 7:21. And of course, this indicates Lord is more like spiritual master. And yeah. And the verses that follow indicates, something that Christians don't take literally. One important consideration of organizational activities, because, labeling somebody as spiritual leader or something like this isn't, that's not going to count as much as the other. One important consideration of organizational activities is the opportunity and need for the zealous Christopher to assume group leadership. It is simply another case of influence or be influenced, lead or be led. The active leaders of the various organizations in any given area are always few. These same leaders' names keep coming up as heads or officers of a number of various groups. For instance, in one eastern city, the commander of one of the local veterans posts is also a member of the city's housing commission, is a campaign leader in the Red Cross Drive, the Community Chest Drive, the Infantile Paralysis and Cancer Funds Program, and is a member of several other civic and social clubs. The net result of situations like this is that the bulk of organizational work falls on the shoulders of a few zealous individuals who are overburdened and cannot do justice to a variety of tasks at one and the same time. Organization by the million. When you consider the multiplicity of the varied types of clubs and organizations in the United States, you will begin to realize the tremendous field for good which is wanting to be reached. Wherever people gather, there are ideas that can be distributed more subtly than in most other spheres of endeavor. In this country alone, there are approximately 3 million organizations of various kinds and functions. Included among them are the trade unions, some 15,000 women's clubs, 12,000 service clubs, countless national, student, labor, business, professional, and other organizations, and a host of local religious, charitable, community, and civic groups. Now, see, back in the day, there was a lot of groups that you could join, and those groups made things possible. And that's what they're trying. The people who are abusing their power as the elite are trying to do is get us all divided and make things less networky for us poor people, or the middle class and all that too. There are sports groups, teams of all kinds, gymnastic and outdoor clubs, hunting and fishing societies, bowling associations. In addition, there are the mutual aid groups set up on a community or trade basis to take care for the more unfortunate, dispensing all kinds of assistance to the indigent and the sick and the bereaved. There are the fraternal organizations, the veterans groups with national affiliations, the hometowners, the Iowans gathered in California, the men of Oslo living in Minneapolis. There are the young people's organizations, the hobbyists, the stamp and coin collectors, the clubs that fit every type of human interest imaginable. Most of these groups include both men and women. But where occasionally an organization is composed exclusively of male members, almost invariably there will be an auxiliary for women. Through all these channels, it is possible to accomplish more than the original purpose for which such groups were formed. Individuals can be influenced on many subjects. The community-guided positions of leadership one. The godless find in organizations of all types a fertile field for their activities. We have much to learn from them. The grassroots in the organization. In recent years, there has been much talk of grassroots movements, with the long term being either used so loosely or misused altogether that people have come to suspect it as just another catchphrase of the vote seeker or the political commentator. Actually, there is such thing as grassroots in our national life. The term denotes the average, down-to-earth men and women usually found in rural areas, yet not exclusively so, who are more concerned with everyday facts than tomorrow's fancies. They lead ordinary lives, enjoy simple if routine pleasures, play with their children, eat home-cooked dinners, listen to their favorite comedians on the radio, and consider the running of society out of the province. The primary concern of each of these persons is his or her immediate family, supporting it, planning for it, holding it together. It is a big job and doesn't leave too much time for the problems of that bigger family called mankind. These are the grassroots people whose horizons are too often limited by their most pressing needs and by their most immediate concerns. Now and then, of course, the narrow pattern of their living is disturbed by a war, by unemployment, by an election, by a newspaper headline, by a radio broadcast. In all this picture, however, one thing has not been mentioned. That is the fact that at some point in his or her crowded schedule, he or she goes to an organization or club meeting. Whether this is done to very routine or to indulge in a less spectacular version of cafe society, it is immaterial. The point is that each becomes then something more than an item in a family unit. He becomes instead a community individual, and that is exactly where each can come into contact with ideas outside the normal mold of family living. In these community contacts at clubs and societies, ideas do take hold. You, the Christopher, interested in distributing Christ's truth and the basic principles on which our republic rests, see, it's not a democracy, it's a republic, will realize that to cultivate these grassroots, you'll have to spread the seeds of grass. Merely to sit around and wait for things to happen is to waste your life in a barren existence. Meanwhile, watching other people with evil ideas plant and reap the harvest. As in the Temple of Blood, it said, blood makes the grass grow. I mean, they're not the ones who came up with that, but, you know. But yeah, it's internalization of power that makes things, or bringing out your inner power is, you know, not just, you know, oh, well, we're the lowly people and, you know, you gotta, you know. Well, there's a lot of things you can say about that meaning, but Matthew 26 includes, but about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing. And he saith to them, why stand you here all the day idle? Be one of God's salesmen. To sell a product, salesmen are advised to make demonstrations, to win political campaigns. Party workers ring doorbells. In both cases, this means going from house to house, meeting people and telling them over and over again about a particular project. Doing these things will involve repetition and purposefully so. For example, imagine you are in a subway, bus, or streetcar, and you see an ad for some sort of medication guaranteed to relieve coughs due to colds. The message leaves no conscious impression. You turn the pages of a newspaper and you see the same advertisement. You hear its praises sung on the radio. Still, this has no visible effect. One day, however, you come down with a cold. You begin to cough. You visit the drugstore on the way home from work, and the man behind the counter shows you several brands of cough syrup. Which one will you buy? Chances are you'll purchase the medicine you've already seen advertised. You've looked at its name so often, heard about it over the air so frequently, that it begins to look and sound like an old friend. That method can be carried over into an organization or club. A person at a meeting hears someone talking up to the idea of preserving our God-given liberties. A day or so later, he goes to his union and hears the same idea repeated, though perhaps with variations. Shortly afterwards, while bowling with some friends, he hears the same idea repeated by a fellow bowling enthusiast. Now the idea becomes in many ways part of him. He has absorbed it. filed it away at the back of his mind. It is in his blood. Soon he is repeating that very idea in public as if it were his own, stating it with increasing conviction and increasing enthusiasm. In short, he has been sold on the idea of God-given liberties in a free democracy. Dangers to be avoided. The godless are fully aware of the power of repetition. That is why they have developed the technique to its most effective point, so as to undermine traditional institutions and fundamental concepts of freedom. And precisely because our freedom seems to be well-founded, many good, if unthinking citizens tend to laugh at the notion that totalitarian groups can wear away the hard rock of our God-given constitutional guarantees of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's a phrase in the Constitution. I'm not sure how they've ever guaranteed that the pursuit of happiness. Well, what makes you happy, right? It is this condition which poses one of the greatest threats to our free way of life. Our country faces a most sinister peril in this complacency, this failure to see the strength of godless erosion. There are parts of these United States where once grew rich and abundant crops, but which today are wastelands because not enough people made sufficient efforts in the direction of soil conservation. They did not protect the land either for themselves or for their children. It's only a handful of earth lost here and there, many of them said. No need to worry. There is a lot more left. Nowadays, it's more of a chemical issue, but yeah. Today, those handfuls of earth represent major agricultural disaster. What erosion did to this soil of America, the constant inroads of godless elements can and are doing to the liberties which were purchased for us at such great cost by those who valued them even above life itself. A second and equally important danger to be avoided can best be summed up in the phrase, sins of omission. Many well-intentioned persons, even when joining various organizations to fight the life-sapping deterioration in our society, unwittingly encourage such deterioration. Yeah. This is going to be 4 programs instead of 2. I didn't intend that.